All right, so happy to have Rune here with us today. I've been a big fan for many, many years, since almost the very beginning. All right, so today I'm going to be asking Rune about a lot about the Endgame and the next 10 years for both Maker and for DAI. So I want to first ask Rune about DAI's Endgame. We'd love to hear your vision on how DAI can help us break out of the current monetary regimes, not only for the crypto savvy, but also for the billions of ordinary people in emerging markets and the global south. Today, our most familiar global unit of account is the US dollar. We think, communicate, quote, and transact in US dollar denomination and are, in this sense, trapped inside the US dollar economic regime. Just like your mother tongue might be Danish and mine is Chinese, but we've always spoken English at global events like this since the Great British Empire. Habits die hard and switching costs have been prohibitively high. To me, the vision of DAI 8 years ago was to create a neutral unit of account that allowed us to still think, communicate, and transact in dollar denomination, but to have this crypto money that actually isn't the US dollar at all. It's reserved by on-chain assets controlled by neither the US nor any government. It liberated us from the US dollar and offered people an important option. It provided an easier way to break out of the US dollar regime. It enabled breakthrough censorship resistance and financial sovereignty. It enabled money innovation and competition. It was a Trojan horse into TradFi. Today, Maker is the largest DeFi protocol, MakerDAO is the largest DAO, and DAI is the largest DeFi stablecoin. MakerDAO's very successful introduction of RWAs has further enhanced DAI's collateral heterogeneity. However, this may also reduce DAI's resistance to government censorship and seizures. What's DAI's endgame as a decentralized money? Is it crypto dollar, a neutral censorship-resistant unit of account that allows people to break away from the US dollar regime and use the dollar as only a unit of account? Is it a DAO-operated digital US dollar that leverages alignment engineering and tokenomics to grow an ecosystem offering drastically enhanced transparency and immutability? What is the endgame for DAI?
Thanks. That was a good overview of many of the different factors that have been really playing into Maker's and DAI's history over all these years. And even, I mean, it's interesting that you're reaching all the way back to this like very early theory and I would say ideology that actually started Maker off, which itself was rooted in projects like BitShares that fundamentally themselves were then ties all the way back to like the very early OG Bitcoin philosophy, right? And the Bitcoin white paper and that whole shebang basically. But you know, so obviously a lot has changed in crypto in the last 8 years now? I don't know. The many years, way too many years that we've been going with Maker. And I think, so, I mean, the one thing that is true, was true all the way back in the beginning and continues to be sort of what has been guiding us throughout all this time is that we wanted to take all of the advantages of blockchain and the possibility and the potential of blockchain, and then we wanted to make sure we could provide it to real people in the real world at a large scale, at global scale, so it actually mattered, right? So it goes beyond just being...
The ordinary people. People are not that crypto savvy like us.
Yeah, and which at the time, I mean, back in 2016, right, meant everyone because there were no crypto savvy. Right. And I mean, even today, the average crypto user is not crypto savvy, you could say, right? We were talking about that with Tether and all that. We'll get to that in a moment, I'm sure. But, you know, so this focus on ensuring that there has to be actual usage, there has to be real users taking advantage of whatever this technology can provide, has really been guiding, you know, the decisions and the evolution of the project over all these years, right? So obviously, the RWA sort of juncture, right, which a lot of people are still, I guess you can say, processing actually, right? I mean, that is in many ways like the key thing that ties to this fundamental question of like, do you want to be ideologically or sort of theoretically pure and optimized, or do you want to be sort of more sort of utilitarian optimizing, right? Like how to actually deliver what's possible to deliver to actual people in the real world, right? So because of something called the stablecoin trilemma, that we also just discussed, right? That basically means that you simply cannot scale up something that is pegged to the dollar, whatever it's pegged to, actually anything that's pegged to an asset, any sort of synthetic asset pegged to some sort of real asset has to tie its collateral back to that real asset. You can't, you know, turn, you can't create something out of nothing. You can't turn iron into gold just by wishing it so, right? You have to ultimately like have the, I mean, if you want to provide stability, there has to be something stable sitting there to provide that
If
stability.
you really want stability, yeah.
Yeah, and then the question is, what is stability, right? Because it's different to many people, right? To some people, stability is freedom from the U.S. government, right? And I would argue, not all of them, but many of those people actually, I mean, they're already in crypto at this point, right? And there truly aren't that many when they, you know, when you understand what freedom from the U.S. government really means, because it pretty much means you get the whole Bitcoin. And that's about it, because more or less everything else ends up tying into the real world in one way or another. But then, you know, with that connection to the real world, you get all the real features that the vast majority of real people actually care about. And in particular, what, you know, I mean, when it comes to the ordinary people, what they care about, what they think is stability, stability is familiarity, which is the US dollar, right? For the vast majority of people. And so in the end, that's why you need RWA to back something like that. And I mean, any state, I think even the most sort of modern, you know, decentralized protocol stablecoins, they build RWA in right from the start, because they immediately recognize that you simply can't, like, you just can't, you know, will demand for leverage on decentralized collateral out of thin air, right? There's a limit to how many people are willing to lever up on staked ETH or something like that, right? And I mean, you still have advantages from this, right? Because with real assets, what decentralization offers is transparency and guarantees around diversification, and then crucially that the layer itself, the sort of the coordinating layer, itself is fully decentralized.
Okay,
right?
so let me just go into the details a little bit. So T-bills themselves, it's harder. I mean, the transparency. Eventually, everybody is pretty much the same. You get audited reports, things like that. However, as a stablecoin issuer, the decision making, the governance, the operations, the treasury operations, all of that, because Maker is heavily using smart contracts. So all of that then is offering better transparency than a centralized issuer. Am I right?
Yeah, and if I was going to make an example about this, right, if you think of something like the financial crisis and the subprime mortgage crash and so on, right, like in a sense, none of the assets, you know, none of the underlying assets and all those houses and buildings, like none of them got like seized or, you know, turned out they didn't have the value people thought they had, but like the value that they had didn't. I mean, they were houses indeed, right? They weren't like fake or anything like that, right? The entire failure of that was the governance and the sort of the coordination and the aggregation was completely messed up and broken, right? And so that's one of the things. So fixing that and provably fixing that with blockchain and with decentralized governance, that's a huge upside that crypto absolutely can bring to the table. That is, you can really apply to the real world in a way that will help people and will just give them better assets, give them more stability, give them better returns and so on. Now, the thing is, even this sort of theory about real world assets and all that, the reality is, even what we're talking about now, that is still just like a bunch of like theory and even ideology, some of it, which again, like normal people don't care about this at all. This is absolutely not gonna make them use a stable coin, but they truly don't care about this kind of stuff, right? Those who care, again, they're already in crypto. Many of them probably in this room, right? There are just not that many that care about these things, right? Like, and so as we were talking about earlier, right? The best example you have of, you know, of a situation where blockchain has been applied to the real world in a way that benefits real people and actually has had an impact, that is of course Tether, right? And how Tether's been used by people, especially here in Turkey, to escape inflation. In Argentina, and yeah, I mean, there's all these interesting examples of just like how Tether has become this, like, it's become a source of stability that people basically feel like they can trust more and can more easily access, and that has some kind of neutrality and some sort of predictability to it. And so that's great. I mean, that means there is a real, like, there's a real demand out there, there's a real use case, and there are real advantages that blockchain can bring to the table. Decentralized stablecoins like DAI can take that, I mean, can basically take that existing market, that existing opportunity, and just apply a lot more advantages and a lot more benefits to people, such as what we were just discussing.
Okay, so based on that, do you think this theory is going to work? Blockchain is a trust-building machine because of the transparency that it provides and immutability, right? So, and in money, in issuing new money, trust is always the thing that's hard to accelerate. That's I think one of the reasons why a lot of people I know in emerging markets, they need access dollar liquidity, US dollar liquidity. And they know USDT, but still, they don't understand crypto that much. So they're like, is this real? Like, it takes time for most of the people to build that trust. And supposedly, blockchain as a trust building machine can accelerate this. So do you feel that by promoting its transparency aspects, that treasury operations, governance, a lot of the operations of Maker and DAI is fully transparent, and you market this, and then you eventually can accelerate the trust building process so that you onboard people faster than other stablecoins?
Yeah, so what you're describing, I would say that's to a large extent what Maker and DAI attempted for the last many years, basically. And I think the conclusion is it doesn't really work. And the reason is, again, this is not actually, like when you're deciding what stablecoin to use, this is just some theory that you don't actually care about. And the number one thing that's gonna, I mean, I think the reason why Tether is super popular everywhere and sort of, you know, is one of the only stablecoins that really retains this popularity, right? And it comes from the fact that that's what people are already using. So like the number one thing, the number one question that matters when you're deciding on a stablecoin, you're trying to get adoption of a stablecoin, is existing network effect, right?
Yes.
And that just means, I mean, and this is of course, this is a huge challenge, because that means the sort of the natural market dynamic is whoever is already big remains big, and anyone new don't really have a chance, right? So that's actually what led us to Endgame, because basically we realized we can't just keep trying to do the same thing and attempt to compete in a dynamic where inherently we are at a disadvantage, because all the advantages we bring to the table, that they're very real, but they are also theoretical, and people don't actually care, and they can't sort of feel them. And what they can feel is scale and simplicity. Right?
Hard to make that into an accelerator.
Yeah.
Your advantage into an accelerator.
So we got to figure out what is it that a decentralized stablecoin and a DAO and decentralization and sort of the realities and the ideals of DeFi, what can it bring to the table that can actually cause end users to feel the advantages of decentralization and not just have to think about it, which they don't want to, right? And so that's kind of Endgame, right? So Endgame it's a sort of almost like a formula or like a set of principles that at its core focuses on retaining and even strengthening the fundamental resilience that's possible with DeFi and decentralized stablecoins. But even more importantly, sort of leveraging that to build sustainable growth that sort of self-perpetuates, right? Because that's then again, what's the point of really fancy resilience and stability if no one's using it, right? It's pointless in that case, beyond theory. I mean, okay, so one way we want to sort of position ourselves very simply, and we're already to some extent doing this, when you think about Tether as like, this is what many people are already using, right? Basically, so I don't think that new stablecoins or even Maker and DAI in its current position should attempt to compete with Tether as money on moneyness. Again, because that is just not going to work. Because they've already achieved that moneyness feeling, and no one else has to the same extent they have, right? But what you can compete on is basically the efficiency of what's possible with DeFi, and essentially focus on being savings, right? And so, I like to talk a lot about this, and I was explaining this. So everyone in Turkey, as I told you before, right? Everyone wants Tether. That's what they want. How are you going to compete with it? And what I say is, look, we're not trying to actually compete with Tether because they're the checking account, right? You can send it, you can spend it, that's great. What we want DAI to really be in this context is to be the savings account, right? So it's things like the DAI savings rate, and then the liquidity and the capacity we have as a DeFi protocol to build things like the PSM, right? The mechanism that allows you to instantly convert today from DAI to USDC. As a part of Endgame, basically, this will increasingly also then focus on being able to convert to USDT, having that instant liquidity, while also actually managing the risk of something like large-scale exposure to USDT, which we don't actually want, because for the reason that everyone else is sort of like, in the end, at this point, I totally believe in the stability of Tether, but it's not tied into regulatory systems in the same way that something like USDC is, for instance, right? So the straddling that question of like how much exposure how much of that exposure do you put into DAI itself, versus how smooth and instant can you make that native sort of feeling of actually it's like a savings account to a Tether you can just use, right? That's the kind of opportunity for growth that I think, well, again, it's already possible today because of the DAI savings rate, right?
Yep.
And then with Endgame, we're just going to take all of this to the next step with, first and foremost with sub-DAOs, right? So sub-DAOs is basically, that's how we're going to scale up, ultimately the governance, the advantage that we have that allows us to deliver all these things in a way that's decentralized, yet it's as solid as if it was a company, but more transparent.
The advantage here is competitive advantage is new governance model, transparency, and the DAO and the sub-DAO endgame framework.
Yeah, but again, actually, all of those things are still just building blocks. They're not real advantages that users care about, right? So the number one thing we're going to do in the short term is we're actually rebranding, Maker entirely, right? So MKR and DAI sticks around, stays exactly the same. People who use that and don't want to be messing with complicated new features that they don't care about, they can just totally ignore it. But the project as a whole sort of rebrands and introduces new, like a new stablecoin and a new governance token. And the goal here is to really align end-to-end the whole project around this idea that the focus is growth that users, growth and features and advantages that users care about and they understand, and simplicity in the message of this is what it is, right?
And
this
one
is what
important feature is the savings account concept.
Yeah, so the savings account, we already have that, so we will simply just have branding that is more aligned with that. But then the sub-DAOs, the thing is, Tether and anyone, it's not really that much of a unique feature to offer a cash yield, ultimately. Right now, DAI and SDAI and the DAI savings rate had a huge success because it did sort of trailblaze having that available in what felt scalable and safe on-chain. But absolutely, it's everyone else is catching up. So and there's no reason why something like Tether wouldn't be able to offer something a bit like this in the future, right? So what we really view as like the truly unique thing you can offer with a DAO, with decentralized stablecoin, is, I mean, I would say basically the one other major use case, major reason why crypto is cool that we've seen, other than stablecoins, which is of course the #1 business model that exists in crypto today, right? And this second, like, secret sauce that crypto is capable of is essentially the magic of DeFi summer, what we saw, right? How actually crypto is capable of organizing humans and drawing out value of humans in a way that sort of goes beyond just simple, I mean, basically what you can do with, I don't know, companies and legal structures and so on, right? There's some sort of unique value you can create, you can get out of people through the sheer accessibility and the permissionlessness of simply giving out tokens or giving them access to tokens and then letting them collaborate, letting them coordinate and try to achieve some goal.
A new way to organize humans and societies so as to accelerate economics activity much more efficiently than the old ways.
Absolutely.
So I want to leave time for this organizational aspect and talk about MakerDAO's Endgame as the biggest DAO. So here comes the next question. We have some time. Nobel Prize receiver, economist Douglas North, believed that reducing uncertainty increases economic activity. For example, I'm willing to make a loan if I'm certain I'll get repaid. We've therefore invented contracts. But to enforce contracts and ensure their immutability, we've also invented centralized institutions whose mission was to help enforce these contracts. These centralized institutions often end up working for their self-interests, breaking the very immutabilities that were their missions to uphold. MakerDAO has the most experience leveraging a DAO framework to build large-scale organizational alignment and immutability. You call this alignment engineering. DAOs also offer better transparency and stronger resistance against government censorship of DeFi money. However, today's MakerDAO must leverage existing legal frameworks and centralized institutions. It needs many business agreements to protect its RWAs, for example. Treasury bills are themselves issued and held by centralized institutions. So what's the end game here for MakerDAO as a DAO? How does MakerDAO plan to bridge the best of both DeFi and centralized frameworks so that it can continue to bring trillions of off-chain GDP on-chain while leveraging DAOs, sub-DAOs, and smart contracts to still uphold immutability and transparency, which ultimately leads to better organizational alignment and accelerated economic growth?
Yeah, so I think actually, I mean, what we were just talking about, right, of DAOs and tokens and yield farming and what, I mean, there was something in DeFi summer, in crypto, that showed that there is some real value here, there's a real possibility here that we can do something. Now, I want to add though that unfortunately DeFi summer and the bull run we saw last time, I mean, unfortunately, while people discovered something real and were onto something real, mostly it was totally wasted, right? Because everybody decided to basically sell out and turn it into Ponzi schemes, all of it, right?
But that's because it was real, right? When it's real, then it definitely will overhype and collapse and then come back again.
Yeah, sure, and I keep saying this also, right? Why are there so many scams in crypto? It's because the technology is so powerful that it directly touches on the power of money, and it draws in the wrong types of people, right. And there's just so much potential to do both good and bad, and then often people choose to do bad, but some will do good, right? And I mean, basically there are major DeFi projects and so on, right, that really are doing something real with this, and right, and pushing the boundaries in this. Anyway, so it's like, I mean, we've seen some good come out of yield farming, but we absolutely haven't seen it take into its extreme in terms of how much can you really use this to deliver better economic outcomes and improve the world and all that good stuff, right? But also what's interesting, right, is that this purpose and this mechanism of coordinating and organizing humans and labor and capital, that is also just the function of money itself, right? That fundamentally is what money itself also does, right? So we think it's sort of natural that you combine that with then this sort of new possibility of DAOs and specifically yield farming, right? Of these sub-DAOs that we're creating as a part of basically reorganizing Maker's governance structure. And that brings us to this, like, what is the final, what is the final unique value prop of the new stablecoin, right? The new brand that sets it apart and will carve out a unique user base, hopefully, fingers crossed, right? That makes it totally unique and makes it possible to complement Tether or whatever, anything else, because it has this unique aspect to it, right? And that is the fact that it has this native, very, very safe yield, but in very interesting sub-DAO tokens, right? That are, entire self-contained economic systems and DAOs that has a lot of possibilities, right? They can be almost unbounded in creativity, but at the same time, they're rooted in like Maker's stable track record and ability to generate real profits and to actually have real economic activity, right?
Will sub-DAOs have corporations or legal entities so that they can leverage existing legal structures, leverage the court system, law enforcement, legal precedents, and also to hold RWAs?
So a DAO itself cannot have a legal entity, but DAOs can interact with legal entities and basically through legal entities but I mean, what's strange about them is that a DAO kind of it has to have a different approach depending on the jurisdiction, right? So it's often, the way real-world assets are done in Maker today is you have these specific arranged structures, they're called, which are sort of like these conduits between DeFi and the real world. But basically, what's so cool about, and so there's so much opportunity because there's so many countries, so many jurisdictions with evolving regulatory frameworks, right? And evolving threat models, right? And threat levels and risk. So sub-DAOs enable the ecosystem to very flexibly and very dynamically allocate to wherever the opportunity is best, right? And each sub-DAO gets to sort of compete on equal terms to find the best opportunities, right? And then, and the point is then, this value, this upside is delivered to the actual end user of the new stablecoin in Maker, right? That they get to pick what do they believe in, what do they want to jump into in crypto, right? What do they want to do in DeFi? And so just to then give an example of like what are the different options, what are the different upsides and possibilities that we provide, right? The key is that sub-DAOs are specialized in different areas, right? So some of them are more TradFi, boring, even financially focused, right? So there's 2 RWA sub-DAOs initially planned for like upcoming launch in what we call phase 2. So that's like the phase following the rebrand. And then we have SparkDAO, which is probably the most like famous, most well-known upcoming sub-DAO, which is a like deep DeFi sort of crypto innovation, decentralized collateral focused sub-DAO. That right now is really, its flagship product is called Spark Protocol, which is an Aave fork that just basically delivers the capital, the scale of Maker, but through sort of the innovative, the sort of current gen lending engine of Aave, and basically other types of cutting edge innovations like that. And then there is Sakura DAO, which is this most experimental sub-DAO community that we're attempting to build, which is where really what we're trying to focus on is what if sub-DAOs are less about just making money and just finance and numbers and all this stuff for nerds and economists, how to make it more relevant for normal people and turn finance less, personal finance should feel less like a job and it should feel more like a game, right? And I sometimes refer to this as like the TikTokification of finance, right? That this is what the people of the future want, right? They don't want their bank to be gray and boring and feel like work. They want it to feel like TikTok, right? And then they're going to get into personal finance, right?
Can we propose like Turkish lira DAOs or Argentinian peso DAOs, Indian rupees DAOs? Sub-DAOs, sorry.
So that all actually happens emergently because sub-DAOs are not created top-down. They are, I mean, so initially there are 4 specific created as sort of the example case of sub-DAOs. But all future sub-DAOs are created algorithmically as a blank slate. And then the only way the tokens are distributed are through yield farming. And then whoever yield farms the tokens, they decide what happens. So you get this complete free market for ideas and creativity. And hopefully a huge amount of untapped, latent innovation and potential can then be unleashed through the sub-DAO as this vehicle.
So we have many money designers, stablecoin protocol designers here, many. Can you use 1 minute to explain to them if they want to work with Maker or if they want to propose a sub-DAO under Maker, what's the best way?
Yeah, so again, so you can't actually propose a sub-DAO. You can only try to influence a sub-DAO once it's been put out there as a blank slate by farming the token. But the thing, I mean, so in the past, right, everybody always wants to work with Maker, and we don't have the capacity to interact with so many counterparties. The sub-DAOs is a big solution to that, right? You can find the sub-DAO that's relevant for what you're doing and then engage directly with that community. And now instead of being thrown into the big Maker forum with like 200 people who are not even interested in what you're talking about, right? And they're drowning you out. You can go to a more focused, specialized community that knows the subject matter, right? Like real assets, then it's people that only do real assets.
But there is no emerging market sub-DAO right now. How do we work with Maker to create one?
You mean for, yeah, you're talking about for like emerging...
adoption here in Turkey.
Yeah, so the sub-DAOs still, the initial kind of proof of concept sub-DAOs are still being shaped, and there will absolutely be one specific that will have that kind of focus because it's such a big, huge market and opportunity for sure.
Okay, I think we're out of time. Thank you everybody for having us. Thank you, Rune.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rune and Wayne. Thank you for this fruitful session.